Steve, I got to bring you in because we certainly have examples now in other disease areas where there is a class of drug with multiple members in that class that have nuanced differences, but from a payer perspective, it makes sense to leverage one class being a preferred class. And there are financial reasons and management reasons for doing that. And I think that's understood and logical. And in the case, let's say, of TNF inhibitors in the rheumatologic population, we saw that with step edits and tiering of drug. And I'm curious if you see that happening, and it's always been kind of politically incorrect to do that in cancer, but again, as we evolve in a value-based care environment, if you see that happening where you will start to look at it, that there may be some nuanced differences in a rare patient who may benefit from one drug over another, but you'll see movement in the payer world to when you start to have 3, 5 more TKIs of the same class, that you'll start to have a preferred TKI.
Yeah, so great question, Bruce. The 3 marketed products are, for us, tier 2, where they're at parity. So Dr. O'Shaughnessy, Bill making his decision based on his preference. There are prior authorizations associated therewith, which we were talking about earlier. They are all currently on a level playing field for us, and actually all preferentially positioned in the current formulary benefit design structure. There are other areas in oncology where there may be some agents that are more preferential, but certainly for the purpose of today's conversation with the three marketed products that I have a tough time pronouncing, they're at parity and at the sort of the best level of tiering.
In my mind, at a clinician level, it starts to sound like a clinical pathway, and which you start to prefer agents over other agents. And it may be because of efficacy and toxicity reasons, but when efficacy and toxicity are, for the most part, equivalent, it may be cost. And I'm curious if you see clinicians starting to move that direction. If you're, again, institutionally, there may be pressure to start to look at that. There clearly is at a practice level, if you're in an OCM practice, to control costs. And part of that controlling cost is also going to be not just cost from a societal perspective, but even cost to a practice based on contracts. And so I'm curious if you see there to be more pressure on oncologists to start to say, we need to pick one.
Well, I think that's probably going to happen. I think Joyce's discussion about AIs and the CD4/6 inhibitors, I guess the example is if tomorrow one of the CD4/6 inhibitors disappeared, would I feel like I'm getting brand X that I had to give my patient? And the answer is no, because at least as we understand it right now, for the most part, subtleties aside, these agents are pretty, as a class, equally effective. And there might be nuances, and all the caveats that Joyce suggested that one drug might, and I underline the might be better in a certain subset of patients. We don't have a lot of compelling data yet. So I think that we're moving in that direction, and the biosimilar example is perfect because formularies are just incorporating these. When we order trastuzumab, I don't know which biosimilar I'm getting, and I feel pretty comfortable that they're getting trastuzumab. It's going to work well, and it's not going to make me feel like I'm compromising the patient's outcome. So I think as long as the data suggests that these agents, whichever class we're talking about, there's more than one agent in a class, that they're clinically equally effective, they have toxicity that's similar, then I don't see why we wouldn't be judging based on cost.
And would route of administration, would frequency of dosing, any of those nuanced differences that have always been much less important than toxicity and efficacy, would they play a role?
Well, sure. I think that enters into it. I think with oral medications, maybe less so, but certainly, when you start thinking about anything that might be IV, requiring administration costs and differences, and you know, it's not as convenient to patients if they have to come more frequently for something, then those, that's part of the equation as well.